Now, the rest of the story.
Well, once again, we're back to side dressing corn. That's right. This is a roll cultivator. Grandpa bought the majority of it with the intentions of literally just roll cultivating corn. So which means when the corn is, about that tall and growing, honestly a little shorter wouldn't hurt. You go through and you roll down through it, you knock out any volunteer weeds. Every year that I've really talked about this, seems like I always get somebody that's going to chime in. It doesn't help the crops as much as you think. It just makes the field look prettier. And well, I'm in the pretty firm belief, and my agronomist, I've gotten him swung to the way that we've seen it on the yield maps where we're seeing bushels of difference, and anywhere from 10 bushels plus. And when you go through and cultivate, it's opening up the soil, it's getting air down to the roots, it's stirring up any chemicals that are there, which pretty much is where I'm at on it for the most part. Before the liquid was a thing, I cultivated just to cultivate because I felt like I was getting healthier crops. My plan is to go through and I'm just cultivating my stuff this year because, well, the amount of corn that I have, just trying to get it side dressed. I mean, we can take the whole cultivation part out of it. Going through and getting it side dressed, getting the liquid down before the corn gets too tall went from not much of a concern to it's going to be kind of nip tuck as to whether or not I'm going to be able to get it all covered. So the first stuff that I planted of mine, I'm probably going to try to sneak out and get it done here between cutting and raking and baling, just because that's where we're at with it. The corn across the road is really starting to take off. It's uneven emergence. The planter not getting the corn into the ground like I really need it to. The ground was hard. I no-tilled into soybean stubble. Putting more weight on the planter next year is going to be a bigger thing. What I've gone through and done to this cultivator though, and pretty much probably the last real updates I'll do to it, the big issue I have is with the line running the length of the bar, the pump being on this side of the cultivator, it's primarily pulling out of that tank. And before I did this or this, we'll talk about them here, I would always have a lopsided fertilizer load on this, so it didn't take very long, especially on long passes. If I'm tilting one way or the other, it would actually transfer between the tanks, and it would primarily like to just hang in that right tank, where before I did either of these, which this is a new add-on for this year, but I did this check valve, so at least everything wasn't allowed to go back that way, which works. But the only problem is then I could have liquid primarily stuck in this tank if I get on the short rows and I'm not running enough out through the cultivator, out through the pump, and then I have it coming out of the top of that tank. So to address that, I did end up going through and I put a shutoff, just a regular old valve in line, and my intentions are, obviously wide open for when I fill it, because I fill it there and I'm able to fill both tanks pretty well even. And this is for when I'm actually in operation. My plans are to cut it back to, at least, halfway open, so that way it'll allow these tanks to run out a bit more evenly. I do have a bunch of ground that is actually fairly level on some corn ground this year, so I should be able to leave it wide open. But on the hills that, I got some contours that it's laid basically in a big U essentially, and this is probably going to be pretty big this year to make sure that I'm not losing any of that expensive liquid. So if I have to, where I need to run this tank down and it just seems like this tank is just shoving it over this way, and with this check valve in here it can't go back that way, I can just shut it off. I might be able to reach it from the tractor now that I look at that. If I actually thought that out a little bit better, I should have mounted it over here. I may have been able to reach down and shut it off, but at least that way then I can potentially save on some liquid. I was really considering taking off this front row of tines. Not going to. The big reason being is because I'm still getting some of that weeding, which weeding isn't necessarily what I'm looking for, but at the same time, my hoses are connected to these front tines, which for the most part it's dropping that liquid between this row and that row. And this back row, these sweeps are essentially, I'm just trying to roll the dirt over on top of the liquid so it's not being exposed to the elements, you know, and it's stuck to the soil. And this thing's seen some use. I'm gonna keep it running as long as I can, but if I go through and do a second one, we run 2, I mean, I'd do some things different. But we are doing the Y dropping, and I have some ground that I'm hitting with this that we can't Y drop just because of how the field lays. And then a fair amount of my acres, it is getting hit with this, plus the Y dropping, just to get the ground worked, that liquid incorporated. And then when they come through in the following weeks and are able to get through and Y drop it, I mean, I'm splitting my nitrogen. I'm just not putting, you know, a full rate through this and a full rate through the Y dropping machine. So my plan is to go through and be done in about 4 or 5 days. 4 days to do everything that I need to have done. 4 days of like long running, like that's like full days, really no breakdowns. That's pretty much just jump in the tractor and run, not drive, run. So 5 days is probably more realistic. I'm hoping I don't have too many issues, other than I got the rubber piece, the rubber cover on this wheel, and I got a missing wheel right there that I was able to replace. The issues I had there were in the last like 5 acres of cultivating last year. And for anybody that, you know, when it comes to doing some of this kind of stuff, I was able to do the job that I needed to do. I mean, I just had to hold the cultivator up so it wasn't running on the gauge wheels. But you get done side dressing, you know, basically skidding sideways across the finish line, and you couldn't tell any difference from the part of the field where the tire was missing and where I had it on. But luckily for me, harvesting last year, I was able to find it. So went through, put a new bearing in it because the old bearing had snapped this off. And the only problem is I don't have any spare parts. I just burned them all up by getting this thing going right now. And I can buy the whole wheel assembly. This whole piece was $25 last year, so this year it's probably closer to 70. And I do have a bunch of rando, you know, I can go through and the S tines, and the big thing is the teeth, the blades, not the teeth. These are the big one I want on it. I've really considered taking off everything on the front like I've told you and just running the sweeps in the back, and primarily just use this for side dressing. So that way these tines are actually farther away from the row if these are no longer part of the equation. And then I'd be able to actually go a little bit faster because I'm not worried about dirt getting thrown over on top of the rows, which the corn is going to be tall enough by the time I get to it this time around, that I'll actually be able to roll the dirt right onto the corn plant, which is what I really prefer, because any of the small plants, weeds that are coming up, I'll be able to roll the dirt over on top of them and they won't be an issue. And breaking open that top crust on a bunch of the soybean stubble, we could probably sit and argue whether or not that's good or bad, but on the stuff close to home, definitely I at least want to break open that top crust for any moisture that we do have coming, so it can soak into the ground a little bit easier. It's hot out. It's supposed to be hotter out. We have no hay cut. We're hoping to go after tomorrow. Tomorrow is Wednesday, and they are calling for a 90% chance of severe, potentially severe storms tomorrow night. That's why I haven't cut anything. I'm in the mindset I could have cut tomorrow morning, windrow it, so the windrow will protect the hay that is being laid down, but a really hard, nasty, pounding rain just doesn't. That's what they're calling for, and I'm hoping that it just turns into a light shower. That, for how hot and windy it is right now, it really won't take long for it to dry up, where we can go through and cut pretty much all of our acres we have to cut. Get them down, get them tedded, get them rolled up. So, all right, guys, that's all I got for this video. Thanks for watching. Thanks for tuning in. Take care. Take it easy. Keep in touch. I'll talk to you later.